tough times. So I'm happy to join Senator Reid today to commemorate 350 years of history for the people of the town of New Shoreham. Congratulations on this historic milestone. Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the distinguished senator from Tennessee for his courtesy, and I yield the floor.
Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on next Tuesday, the nation's largest exporter and an employer of 159,000 Americans will be appearing before an administrative judge in Seattle to defend itself against a claim brought by the acting general counsel of the National Labor Relations Board. That claim is that a corporate decision to expand production of its, quote, next-generation airliner in South Carolina, a right-to-work state, is a violation of federal labor law. Since 1947, the federal law has affirmed the right of states to enact what we call right-to-work laws, which prevent unions and employers from requiring employees to join a union, as well as pay dues or fees in order to keep their jobs. In my own state of Tennessee, for example, manufacturers such as Nissan and now Volkswagen and General Motors have built factories and increased the production of cars made and sold in the United States, in large part due to the environment created by Tennessee's right-to-work law. The President recently went to the Midwest to say, in effect, that the auto bailout helped restore the American automobile industry. I would respectfully disagree. I think what has restored the American automobile industry has been the right-to-work laws in 22 states, which have created a more competitive environment in those 22 states and in the Midwest and other states where the laws don't exist, which permits manufacturers to be able to make in the United States cars and trucks that they sell in the United States. But unfortunately, Mr. President, American companies in our 22 right-to-work states are under assault from a government agency that's driven by an anti-business, anti-growth, and an anti-jobs agenda. This may be the most important battle over labor laws in the United States today. That's why Senator Graham and DeMint and I, actually we have 35 senators co-sponsoring this bill, have introduced legislation to preserve the law's current protection of right to work and prevent the NLRB from moving forward in their case against the Boeing Company and others. The Job Protection Act, as we call it, will prevent the NLRB from ordering a company to relocate jobs, will guarantee employer rights to decide where to do business, and protect employer free speech associated with the costs and benefits of a unionized workforce. The company that will be tried on Tuesday is Boeing, a solid, upstanding American success story. Over the last century, Boeing has built the passenger planes that allow Americans to travel the world, has built the warplanes and weaponry that enable our soldiers, sailors, Marines, and airmen to defend freedom, has built the spacecrafts that send our astronauts into orbit and to the moon, has built satellites that deliver communications around the globe. Boeing's newest commercial passenger airliner is a 787 Dreamliner. It's a shining example of American innovation and American entrepreneurship. It's been designed with a paramount focus on efficiency and performance to allow a mid-sized aircraft to travel as far as a jumbo jet while using 20% less fuel and producing 20% less emissions than today's similarly sized aircraft, and traveling at roughly the same speeds as a 747 or 777. It has also been a tremendous commercial success despite these difficult economic times. Since 2004, 56 customers spanning 6 continents have placed orders for 835 Dreamliners valued at $162 billion. President Obama has recognized the leadership of this company. He's named the chief executive officer of the company, Mr. McNerney, as chairman of the nation's Export Council. And more recently, Mr. Bryson has been nominated to be the nation's Commerce Secretary. The Boeing success prompted the company to decide in 2009, 2 years ago, to establish a second assembly line for the airliner in South Carolina. This is in addition to its current assembly line in Washington State. South Carolina is a right-to-work state. Washington State is not. On Tuesday, next Tuesday, the NLRB acting general counsel will ask an administrative judge in Seattle to stop Boeing from expanding its production in South Carolina, arguing that the decision was made in retaliation for past strikes by union employees in Washington. That claim ignores these facts. No union jobs are being lost here. Nobody is being demoted. No personnel are being moved. No benefits, salaries, or work hours are being cut back as a result of this expansion. It ignores the fact that Boeing's decision was announced, as I said, nearly 2 years ago. That means that down in South Carolina, there have been 9,000 construction jobs. They've hired 1,000 new workers to work at this plant, and the plant's supposed to open next month in July. At the same time, Boeing has actually added 2,000 new jobs in Washington State since its announced expansion in South Carolina. That's 2,000 new union jobs in Washington State. South Carolina, of course, is a right-to-work state where employees may choose to join the union or not join the union. Suspending its expansion to South Carolina will result in billions of dollars of lost economic development and jobs to that state. But the NLRB's acting general counsel does not seem to care about these facts or the impact of this case on those jobs. Recently, several of Boeing's employees in South Carolina, whose jobs are hanging in the balance, asked to intervene in the case. The acting general counsel opposed that, stating that, quote, these Boeing employees in South Carolina have no cognizable interest in participating in the proceeding sufficient to justify their intervention, unquote. Now, Mr. President, it's hard to imagine anyone with a more direct interest in this than the Boeing workers in South Carolina, but facts like these don't seem to matter when you have an agenda. But this case is about more than airplanes, more than Boeing, and more than South Carolina. This is about the future of our economy and our competitiveness as a nation. It's just the latest attempt by this administration to chip away at right-to-work laws, to change the rules and give unions more leverage over employers, and have politically influenced bureaucrats in Washington determine the means of production for private industry in the United States. If the acting general counsel's request is affirmed following next week's hearing, it will be prima facie illegal for a company that has experienced repeated strikes to move production to a state with a right-to-work law. The chief executive of Boeing, Mr. President, has pointed out that this will not only hurt the 22 right-to-work states, it's also not good for the states that do not have a right-to-work law. Those non-right-to-work states will suffer because a company that operates in their state that is unionized will effectively be prevented from growing or expanding to a right-to-work state, therefore hindering the ability of any state to attract new manufacturers and create new jobs. So instead of making it easier and cheaper to create jobs in the United States of America, manufacturers will be further incentivized to expand or open new facilities in Mexico, in China, or India to meet their growing needs. Boeing and its 787 Dreamliner are shining examples of what is right in America and what is necessary to rebuild and grow our country's economy. The new production plant in South Carolina is the first new assembly line for large airplanes in 40 years in our country. Now, we need to remember that Boeing sells airplanes everywhere in the world and that it can make airplanes anywhere in the world. We would like for Boeing and other manufacturers to make in the United States what they sell in the United States so the jobs can be in this country instead of overseas. As this administration's Commerce Secretary, Gary Locke, correctly observed in March testimony before the Senate Commerce Committee, quote, manufacturing is essential to America's economic competitiveness. It's a vital source of good middle-class jobs. is a key driver of innovation, said Mr. Lott. With 9.1% unemployment, with a soft economy, government and Washington need to allow manufacturers such as Boeing to prosper, innovate, and create jobs. We need to make it easier and cheaper for those manufacturers to make in the United States what they sell in the United States. Expanding new production lines in South Carolina was a business decision made by Boeing's executives and board members on behalf of their shareholders who believe it was in the country's best interest. As I mentioned, those board members, those chief executives of that company are well respected, including by the President of the United States, who has invited them to be a part of his administration. But under this administration, the NLRB seems only to be concerned about the interests and agenda of organized labor, an agenda that has been soundly rejected by the vast majority of private sector workers in both right-to-work states and non-right-to-work states across the country in recent years. So, Mr. President, all eyes will be on Seattle next Tuesday, when one of our nation's greatest assets and contributors to our economic future will be put on trial for investing, creating, and innovating in our country at a time when we're in the middle of an economic recession. This will be a true test of whether manufacturers are able to make in the United States what they sell in the United States, or whether they will be encouraged to make overseas what they sell in the United States and put those jobs there instead of here. It will be a true test of whether the administration's export policy is exporting airplanes or exporting jobs. Mr. President, I yield the floor. And I notice the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Are we presently in a quorum call, Mr. President?
Yes.
May I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated?
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm here this afternoon because on May 12, 2011, the National Academy of Sciences released a significant report. It's entitled America's Climate Choices. In 2007, Congress directed the Academy to write this report. The researchers who contributed to the report include scientists, economists, and policymakers from world-class institutions such as the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, DuPont, and MIT. The list of the states from which the committee comes is very broad. California, scientists came from, North Carolina, Maryland, Georgia, Virginia, Michigan, Wyoming, Washington State, Tennessee, Arizona, North Carolina, Missouri, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Colorado, Texas. The report was peer-reviewed. Let me actually ask unanimous consent that at the end of my remarks, the list of the committee, which is page Roman numeral V, Roman numeral 5 of the report, be added as an exhibit.
Without objection.
The report was peer-reviewed by academic reviewers from such universities as Stanford, the University of Texas, the University of South Carolina, Harvard, and Carnegie Mellon. And yet, Mr. President, this significant report, requested by Congress, drafted by experts, peer-reviewed by science, has fallen on really deaf ears here in our nation's capital. Why is this? Is it because the report addresses a problem that we've already solved? No. Is it because the report tells us not to worry? Nope, it's not that either. The report, America's Climate Choices, adds to the body of climate science evidence and reflects the clear consensus of the scientific community, which is that carbon pollution is creating dangers across our planet and must be addressed if we are to avoid its most disastrous consequences. These are the facts in the report, and I quote, "Climate change is occurring, is very likely caused by human activities, and poses significant risks for a broad range of human and natural systems." End quote. Are we prepared for these significant risks? No, we are not, concludes the report. I quote again, "The United States lacks an overarching national strategy to respond to climate change." The report warns further that, and I quote again, "Waiting for unacceptable impacts to occur before taking action is imprudent because the effects of greenhouse gas emissions do not fully manifest themselves for decades, and once manifested will persist for hundreds or even thousands of years." Starkly, the report calls on us now to begin mobilizing for adaptation. The precise quote, "Begin mobilizing now for adaptation." So the report is an urgent call to action by a widespread group of our most responsible scientists, peer-reviewed by our most responsible universities. Why, then, is it being ignored? I believe, Mr. President, that many of my colleagues are ignoring this report because they are hoping this problem of carbon pollution changing the atmosphere and the climate of our planet will just go away. They're hoping that somehow if we don't discuss it, indeed if we deny it, climate change will not happen. If we ignore the laws of physics and chemistry and biology, those laws may cease to apply to us. Well, we can repeal a lot of laws here in this United States Senate, but we cannot repeal the laws of nature, and we are fools to ignore them. Some even attack the underlying science. But this is a strategy that is as old as industry reaction to science that industry does not like. A recent book looked at the EPA efforts to protect us from secondhand smoke at a time when the tobacco industry wanted unregulated ability to smoke, did not want people protected from secondhand smoke, pretended that secondhand smoke was not dangerous. The writers conclude most of the science upon which the EPA relied with respect to secondhand smoke was independent. So attacks on the EPA wouldn't work alone. They'd have to be coupled with attacks on the science itself. A memo from Philip Morris's communications director, Victor Hahn, said the following: without a major concentrated effort to expose the scientific weaknesses of the EPA case, without an effort to build considerable, reasonable doubt, then virtually all other efforts will be significantly diminished in effectiveness. In other words, in order to create doubt, they had to attack the science directly. And they have done so, to the point where Mr. Hahn said that EPA was an agency that is at least misguided and aggressive and at worst corrupt and controlled by environmental terrorists. So it's not a new story for industry to try to deny the science that shows the danger of what an industry is providing. But these attacks simply won't stand. The facts are too strong against them. Over the last 800,000 years, Earth's atmosphere has contained CO2 levels of 170 to 300 parts per million. That is solid science. That's a fact. That's not a theory. It is not in dispute. That is the range within which humankind has lived for 8,000 centuries. And by the way, it's not clear that 8,000 centuries ago mankind had yet mastered the art of controlling fire. Essentially, the entirety of human history has taken place within that bandwidth of 170 to 300 parts per million of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere. In 1863, the Irish scientist John Tyndall determined that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere traps heat and traps more heat as the concentration of carbon dioxide increased. That is textbook science. It's been textbook science for generations. That's not in dispute either. Since the Industrial Revolution, our industrialized societies have burned carbon fuels in measurable amounts, usually measured as gigatons or metric tons. A gigaton, by the way, is a billion with a B, metric tons. Now, we release, depending on the year, up to 7 or 8 gigatons, 7 or 8 billion metric tons each year. That's not in dispute either. We now measure carbon concentrations going up in the Earth's atmosphere. Again, this is a measurement. This is not a theory. The present concentration exceeds 390 parts per million. Remember, for 8,000 centuries, humanity has existed in a bandwidth of 170 to 300 parts per million. And we are now at 390 parts per million, well outside the bounds that we've inhabited for the last 800,000 years. That also is not in dispute. That's a fact. This document, America's Climate Choices, documents the changes in climate that have already been observed and measured in the United States. Again, not theory, documented, measured, and observed. These are also not in dispute. Over the past 50 years, our United States average air temperature has increased by more than 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Our total U.S. precipitation has increased on average by about 5%. Sea levels have risen along most of the U.S. coast. Heavy downpours have become more frequent and more intense in the southeastern and western United States. And the frequency of large wildfires and the length of the fire season have increased substantially in both the western United States and in the presiding officer's home state of Alaska. If you take a look at the increase in carbon concentrations in our atmosphere, they can be plotted. Today is one of the last days that our pages are with us after many, many months, and they have been here in school in the very early mornings, and they've been learning mathematics, and it wouldn't surprise me if our pages were able to take a series of points and plot a trajectory off of those points. That is not a complicated scientific endeavor. If you plot the trajectory of our carbon concentration, it puts us at 688 parts per million in the year 2095 and 1,097 parts per million in the year 2195. Now, that's a pretty long way off, but when you think that for 800,000 years we've inhabited a planet in which the carbon concentration in the atmosphere was between 170 and 300 parts per million, and in a matter of a century and a little more, we will have more than doubled that concentration. And another century hence, another 300 points up. That's a very, very significant, indeed an epic shift. These carbon concentrations are outside the bounds not of the last 8,000 centuries, but of millions of years of this planet's history. The National Academy of Sciences report warns us this as well. In addition to the potential impacts that we are able to identify, there is a real possibility of impacts that have not been anticipated. Let me say that again. In addition to the potential impacts that we are able to identify, there is a real possibility of impacts that have not been anticipated. When we travel outside of a range that has protected our species and our planet for 8,000 centuries, we create forces that are hard to anticipate. And consequently, we create dangers that are hard to anticipate. This National Academy of Sciences report does not just stop at cataloging the effects of climate change, however. As requested by Congress and as indicated by the report's title, America's Climate Choices, the report lays out the choices we have moving forward. If only we will acknowledge the facts of this problem and act responsibly. The laws of nature, of course, do not care if we are paying attention. Climate change is happening, and it poses grave risks to us, and it will go forward whether we choose to acknowledge it or not. As I said earlier in the speech, we can do a lot of repealing of laws in this Senate, but we don't get to repeal the laws of nature. There are real risks that we are facing, but there are also many positive reasons that we should address the problem of carbon pollution. Developing clean and truly renewable energy sources and working to run our American businesses more efficiently will help us retain our economic leadership in the global marketplace. And that, Mr. President, means jobs for Americans. Here's the report again on the potential harm to our economy if we don't invest in a clean energy future. I quote, "The European Union has already increased its reliance on renewable energy and put a price on CO2 emissions from major sources without detectable adverse economic effects. China has placed low-carbon and clean energy industries at the heart of the country's strategy for industrial growth and is making large-scale public investments, for instance, in smart grid energy transmission systems to support this growth. Firms operating in the United States could find themselves increasingly out of step with the rest of the world and without the same robust domestic markets for climate-friendly products. Moreover, U.S. firms in energy-intensive sectors could be disadvantaged relative to their more energy-efficient foreign competitors if energy prices rise in coming decades." That's no idle speculation. We are already seeing the United States fall behind in clean energy technologies. We invented the first solar cell. We now rank 5th among the countries that manufacture solar components. 5th. The U.S. has only one of the top 10 companies manufacturing solar energy components and only one of the top 10 companies manufacturing wind turbines. Half of America's installed wind turbines were manufactured overseas. Portsmouth, Rhode Island, has installed 2 wind turbines. One was manufactured by a Danish company. The other was manufactured by an Austrian company, its components delivered to Rhode Island by a Canadian distributor. Imagine if we drove demand for domestic manufacturing of wind turbines, of solar cells and panels, of rechargeable batteries. Imagine the people we could put back to work, the factories we could reopen, the energy that this growth would infuse into our economy. The new energy economy that beckons us has been described in congressional testimony as bigger than the tech revolution that brought us our laptops and our iPads and these BlackBerries, and the internet services that are now so important a part of our daily lives. Whether we Twitter or go on eBay or shop Amazon or do Facebook. In 15 years, that internet grew from nothing to a $1 trillion economy. A $1 trillion economy. By comparison, the global energy economy is $6 trillion. We do not, as a country, want to fall out of the race to control that new energy economy. And yet that is exactly what we're doing. America designed much of the underlying energy technology that the world is using. But other countries have set smart policies and provided financial incentives to their industries, and now they're pulling away from us in bringing those new technologies to market. A $6 trillion market, and our foreign competitors are pulling away from us in bringing our own technologies to that market. Our competitors are seizing the advantage in the development and deployment of new energy technologies, and we are letting them. But we can still change this trajectory. We can face up to the facts of climate change, see the opportunity in that looming threat, strengthen our economy, and create jobs. The National Academy of Sciences report is just one more reminder of this historic charge to our Congress, an historic charge at which right now we are failing in our duty. I thank the presiding officer. I yield the floor. I'd note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Without objection.